And it's now my immense pleasure to introduce Alvaro Barrington. I'm not going to read Alvaro's CV because Alvaro's CV is an extraordinary, very long list. It would take more than 20 minutes to read it, but you can find it online. It's basically Alvaro wrote a very beautiful biographical poem, really, which is an evolutive piece, an organically growing piece. And of course, Alvaro has always worked with a commitment to community, which informs his very wide-ranging, very expansive practice. He considers himself primarily a painter, but works with many collaborations, brings his work into concerts, into philanthropy, but of course also very importantly every year into the context of the Carnival in London and in Notting Hill. And today we're going to talk not only about Alvaro's work, but we're going to talk about the exhibition, which you hopefully are going to visit afterwards. We can see the exhibition right after the talk, and Daniel Baumann will then introduce the whole following program. And Alvaro did not want to show images because he wants us all to see the work afterwards. So a very warm welcome to Alvaro Barrington. So Alvaro, maybe we can, because I mentioned, am I mic? No, I think I need the mic.
Oh, you need it. Yeah.
Exactly. You are mic. So yeah, but before we begin, because I mentioned your evolutive poem, I thought it would be great that you tell us about that, because it's an infinite poem, your CV.
Oh yeah, I have sorry. It's not so much of a poem. I think it's a collection of things that I've heard that I thought spoke more about who I am than Alvaro Barrington, born 1983 in Caracas, Venezuela, boom, 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 boom. I didn't really know what that said about me, but I did know, like, oh, somebody said, and maybe I don't even know what my bio is, so I'm gonna read about it myself on my phone so that I can remember. Oh, actually, something Rick said earlier, I thought, oh my God, this speaks more to how I'm gonna understand myself tomorrow than Alvaro Barrington, born 1983, which was, I never think about funding for community projects. I think about resources. And I thought, what the fuck? Yeah, of course. So I think that says more to me than, more for me than, oh, I was born in 1983.
Thank you. And we want to talk about this exhibition, Uncle A, Eat the Cake. So we're going to eat again a cake after Suzanne Hefuna. And I wanted to ask you to tell us about the title of the exhibition we're going to see after the talk.
I think, so I guess it's, maybe I'll start from the beginning, but art for me is always about an encounter with something. It's about an encounter that allows you to understand who you are and how things affect you. And it could be in a good or a bad way, but I think it's always about a kind of engagement that is internalized through your senses. So the opportunity came to do a exhibition at this really wonderful church, and I grew up in the church. Had to go to Catholic school as a kid, and it just had these very beautiful texture, and I thought I would make an exhibition that sort of made me think through the life of Jesus. So there's this one painting, but also really kind of like the idea that religion was at one point a kind of compass for many people. And then when Nietzsche said God is dead, I think, at least on the American side, consumerism became a North Star. So you're often referred to in America as the consumer, right? And so I thought, well, how does, and I'm a consumer, I go to, I like, but how does that manifest itself into like who we are. And then I thought about like Jesus and um, him turning water to wine, or yeah, water to wine. And I thought, oh, maybe he was an alcoholic. So there's a water to wine um, painting. But then also he hung out with Mary Magdalene, who was a sex worker. And I thought, oh, well, what does that say? You know, I grew up in a neighborhood with many sex workers in my life. And then I thought, you know, when you're walking with a sex worker, as Jesus would say, you realize life is complicated. And and then he also there was a story of the tax collector. And then I got hit with I made a decent amount of money a couple of years ago and got hit with a huge tax bill. And I thought, oh my God, Uncle Sam is really crazy. And so then there's a tax collector, which is sort of a weird fresco. And then there is, you know, America's a really, and then it's really an American story because America's a really interesting place because it's mostly people who are formed through trauma who then leave and land in America. So it's very complicated because whether you're an enslaved person or whether you are a Holocaust survivor or whether you're the Irish or whoever, it's a place where trauma is built into the DNA of our body. And so that means that how we engage with each other is really interesting. And it's always a great social conversation. So there's these rows that there's this poem that the rapper poet Tupac had about the rose that grew from concrete. And it was this idea that if you see a rose that managed to find its way through the cracks, that you would honor it because it would, even though you might touch it and it might prick you, you'll still be astonished because it found a way to survive. It found a way through the light. And so I made these cement paintings.
You told me about these rows some time ago, and you said this idea that even in the toughest conditions, there are people that are beautiful and fragile and tough, all the kind of qualities that you see in a rose. Now, there is also a connection to music and to sound in the exhibition. There are the saints, of course, and we discussed a lot a saint with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. Some weeks ago, we discussed Hildegard von Bingen. But in your exhibition, alongside the references to the saints and sinners, there is also a very strong musical reference to Tina Turner. Can you tell us about that? Who, of course, lived in Switzerland.
Yeah. I mean, I love Tina because I love the idea of choosing yourself. And I remember as a kid, my stepmom was in a not a great relationship, was watching um, the movie that Tina, the What's Love Got to Do with It. And but anyway, I remember just thinking, wow, imagine being born anime in in the American South and the amount of imagination that you had to do to sort of end up in Switzerland. And not in a bad way, just in a whoa, the mental leaps are incredible, you know. And I really loved it. You know, I really loved that she always figured a way to reimagine herself. And then I love this idea of like when she chose her name, Tina Turner, when she said, I just want my name. I loved it all. I'm extremely fascinated because one of the few labels I call myself is an existentialist.
Now, you also collaborate in almost all your projects. There's a kind of a practice really of many collaborations, and that's also true for the project here. It's a collaboration with Teresa Farrell, with whom you did your BA, I think, because you've known each other for more than 10 years. Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration on this piece with Teresa?
So Teresa and I went to art school together, and it was really interesting to me. I had to return to art school because I grew up in what I would think of as probably one of the last great American Renaissance, which is this period between like 88 to like 2010, which would include every in the northeast part of America, which would include everything like the Cosby Show, which was such a huge imagination, and I think without that you probably not have President Obama. But then you also had like a hip hop that was incredibly brilliant. You had comedy. You had all of these incredible things that was happening that I was around that I felt excited to constantly be a part of, and that the world was celebrating. Everybody knew who Tupac was, who Biggie was, who Busta Rhymes was, and then I went to art school, and I was told that in that all this art that I was experiencing around me, that the most interesting artist was Michelangelo. And it was really confusing to me. I just thought, oh my God, I don't know if Michelangelo ever met Lil Kim, what he would say. So I just really fell out of love with art. And then I went to art school, and but I always had to go to art school, but I was always told something that was completely different than what I was living through. And T, who grew up in a similar situation, maybe helped me understand the value of all of these types of artworks. And and that Michelangelo, and I think this always gets sort of confused, but that art is really about the culture of understanding who we are and what the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So the Sistine Chapel, one of the reasons the West holds so close to idea of individualism, which has everything from IP, is that the Sistine Chapel is really, God giving individual identity to man, which is really a Western concept, which is something we hold on to so like it's our North Star in a way. We form so much of our collective decision making around that, ideas of democracy. Without that Sistine Chapel, maybe democracy wouldn't be created. I don't know.
Now, you also talked about this idea of actually getting art, out of the chapel. And when I came to your studio a couple of months ago in London, and we also saw each other in your show in Paris, you kind of said that you really want to kind of not leave the world of exhibitions, but you kind of want to go beyond that, and you want to have a different form of impact. We talked about impact, and of course you do it already with the Notting Hill Carnival, which attracts every year, I think about 2 million people, is that
Yeah.
correct? And it's obviously one of the biggest street festivals in Europe. And what is interesting is that the way you connect communities is, of course, the Caribbean community, but you make many connections, but you bring also your art there actually through a very astonishing kind of abstract stage. I wasn't there last year I missed it, but I saw in your studio the paintings, which you then fixed, on the stage. So it would be great to hear a little bit about how you sort of make this social sculpture at the Carnival, and what you meant in Paris when you said you want to do more of that, and you want to kind of leave this world of exhibitions and go into a different sort of arena or field, or yeah.
Well, one of the things we talked about was, and what I really love about what you and Julia at Serpentine did with the pavilion was that it was an art encounter with outdoors, and so people would go to the pavilion and not know that it was attached to a museum, that the Serpentine was right in front of it. And I really it that felt quite honest to me, because so much of how I grew up in the neighborhood that I grew up in was, you couldn't be a great rapper or couldn't be a great artist if you wasn't rapping at the street corner, and everybody would go see you. So we would go see Busta Rhymes because we knew that he was rapping. And so it was really about, you were allowed to engage with art without doors, because anybody could come to that corner. Sometimes police came and that wasn't great, but anybody could come to that corner. And I really love this idea that we have to make art be without doors. It has to be a public engagement, because sometimes I think the art world is too online. It's so um, not aware of public dialogue, that it ends up really becoming so esoteric. And I really love the esoteric conversations, but I don't want to seem foreign to my nephew or my brother. So I like to do art in the spaces that they will show up at, which is places like Carnival. And what's really interesting about Carnival, first thing, 2 million people participate, but it's not really about the individual. It's really about the collective. And so the musician is just as important as the person who's just walking down the road with their daughter. Everybody's participating. And so it really removes hierarchy when you're putting on a costume, when you're making a painting. And so it's been exciting to every year figure out how to collaborate with with the community, with the not with the carnival community. This year was really special because I think it was one of the first times we kind of got it right, where people would see the truck going down on the road, and um, all of a sudden, they would stop and dance. But could I tell a story about the importance of carnival?
Yeah, it's
I know you have some questions.
no, it's urgent. Tell us the story.
Okay. So, in the 90s, I've said this story a couple times, but maybe, in the 90s in Brooklyn, one of the worst things you could be was Haitian. People would say these things like, "Oh, do you have HBO?" And somebody go, "No, what's that?" They go, "Haitian body odor." So they had all these jokes for Haitian people of Haitian immigrant, and then all of a sudden in 96, 97, there was the most gorgeous woman, Lauryn Hill, who was in a group called the Fugees, which was short for the refugees. And it was her and Wyclef Jean and Praz. And, I was in a neighborhood where there was a big Haitian community, but most Haitians at the time pretended to be something else. They pretended to be Jamaican, they pretended to be American, they pretended to be something else. And so on our carnival, which would start at one road and go all the way down to another road, you had each truck which represented a different nationality. So you had the Grenadians, which I consider myself Grenadian. So it'd be 100 of us, 200 of us. You had the Trinis, Trinidadians. There was a big Trinidadian community, so there'd probably be 2,000 Trinidadians. Jamaicans, there'd be like 2,000 Jamaicans. And the Haitian truck would have maybe 100 people who wanted to claim that being Haitian. And so the truck started on Eastern Parkway on one end, and the idea was that as you go along, you would play a song, and the truck that had the best song that year would be the song that blew up nationally. So think Sean Paul, all these guys would perform on it. And in about 96, there was Lauryn Hill was on the Haitian truck, and it started off on the first block, and you would just hear, "Ooh la la la." I'm a horrible singer, so please forgive me. And there was 100 Haitians, and as soon as she went, "Ooh la la la," all of a sudden there's 200 Haitians. Then the next block, "Ooh la la la," then there's 300 Haitians. And it was like this call and response. It's really big in the Black community. We're really part of this call and response community that you find in our. And by the time it got down, like maybe 20 blocks, there were about 4,000 Haitians. It was so moving. First thing, the next day, the last thing you said is a Haitian joke, because all the Haitians realized they were the biggest group in New York City. But it gave them such a pride. And so that's what I mean about culture. It's about how we understand and change it ourselves.
Alvaro, thank you so much. Big round of applause. There really could not be a better conclusion. But we now can take questions. We have quite a lot of time actually for questions to Alvaro. And again, if you could please turn down the lights because we cannot see you, so it's very weird.
Yeah, no.
So the lights are very aggressive, so if you can please turn down these lights, and then we can see you and take questions.
But I get to stare at you up close, so that's nice.
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you so much. Do we have questions for Alvaro? I mean, whilst we wait for questions, maybe you can tell us about another project which has a lot to do with really bringing art into a context for everyone. And absolutely no doubt is our collaboration on this basketball court with the London Lions, with the Serpentine, when we invited you to do a basketball court in Bethnal Green, which is now used. And it's kind of a painting you did. The basketball court is a painting, but it's also ad usum. Can you talk about that? And in the meanwhile, you can all think about the questions.
Could we talk about, Henry Kissinger had a great phrase that I love. And that he said, could you have questions for my answers? And I kind of have I know he's not the most favorite person to get quoted, but I love that line. I just thought, could we talk about the BMW project?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
So anyway, you can all see the Bethnal Green project online, but we were actually collaborating with Alvaro on a project with BMW, and you created a whole series of maquettes, and we really talked about this idea that the car of the future is not only a car, it's something very, very different. So yeah, it would be amazing if you can talk about that.
Yeah, I'm really curious. I mean, I think we're in it was so great to hear you guys speak about your project with AI. I think we're at a phase in life where so much of what we understand as being fundamental to being a human being is completely being disrupted right now. And so, for example, learning language is so fundamental to how you view the world. And in 20 years, 30 years, AI, you're going to be speaking in your native language, and AI is going to immediately translate, just like they translated Holly. So that means you'll never have to really learn language. You'll never have to learn so many things that were so fundamental to how we understand ourselves, because in 30 years, it's just going to completely disrupt ourselves. These things were fundamental. Language was fundamental to the nation state. I think we're going to be in 30 years in a culture state. So for example, two brothers and sisters, a brother and a sister, may live in the same room, but somebody may be more into punk rock and somebody may be more into Korean pop. And those two people, brother and sister, will have nothing in common except for their parents, but the person who's really into Korean pop will have way more in common with how they understand the world with someone in Korea who's also someone in Asia. Someone in South America. So the car was just about, what happens when we get into the car and it's now a site of culture. It's a culture state. And what are the things that you encounter?
Thank you, Alvaro. Do we have questions or comments? Yeah. We can have the microphone. Yes. 1 second, the microphone is arriving.
Yes, we have been talking a lot about AI in several presentations. We never talked about the dangers and the risks. And I would like you to reflect a little bit on this. And hierarchies that was mentioned by Hans Ulrich and Henry Kissinger, just to mention two eminent persons. Kissinger passed away, unfortunately. They pointed their finger to the risks and to the dangers. They even talked of the end of humanity. And hierarchies now, he works his whole life to protect AI from dangerous influences. And Google purchased DeepMind, but in a separate unit that is protected by fantastic eminent persons. Now, I wonder what you think about risks inherent in AI. Is this something you think about, or you think it's not to be considered?
Well, we talked about this the other day. I think I really it kind of is always awkward for me when people talk about the future is more dangerous than yesterday, because I don't know what yesterday people are thinking about. Is it the era of nuclear bombs or the era of like, I mean, what? Like, I'm not sure. So I just think we're always, as human beings, prone to danger. We're going to touch the fire and we're going to get burnt. And somebody's going to go, no, idiot, that's going to burn you. And so we'll figure it out. There'll be tremendous dangers in AI, but so was the creation of the nation state. That had tremendous amount of violence attached to it. And so I think every invention that we have, they're all innovation that we have in identity, the innovation of religion, all of it, AI, it always is going to come with mass amount of violence because we're unfortunately subjective beings who are violent. But we are also subjective beings who have incredible generosity, who have incredible empathy. And so I think, maybe the 8-year-old kid right now will probably be extremely violent, but then they'll also be probably much more human in other ways. But I do think it'll look completely different than how we understand it. I think I've said this before. I feel like where we are with AI is that humans just discovered fire. And now we're just learning, oh, you can make it big, you can make it small, but really AI will probably be what creates electricity and cooking and all the art that is associated with like, oh, now I have a stove and now I could cook and now I could feed people and I could feed my family. And I think that will probably be where AI will be, but human beings will never not be violent. I think we're violent because somebody drinks somebody's water. And they're like, why did you drink my water? It's like, well, go grab another cup. I used to have fist fights with my brother because he's like, you drank my water. I'm like, there's 5 bottles of water in the fridge. And then we're fighting. And then my aunt would come and smack both of us and say, stop it. So I just think we're generally like, we're somebody's going to use AI to do some crazy violence, but somebody's probably going to use AI to figure that somebody has cancer 10 years before they develop it.
Thank you, Alvaro. We can take more questions.
Make a comment.
Yes.
Of course.
Now, we are not only talking of the dangers of AI, but we are living in a very particular period of the world. And the word Anthropocene has been created.
Yeah.
We are now entering the period of the human being. And there have been about 20 or 30 researchers that looked all over the world for maybe 15 years to find a particular or a molecule or just an element that can be found all over the world, in any place around the world, that signifies the Anthropocene. And they found like plastic particles, they found like material that is used in oil extraction. And then they came to the conclusion the most relevant particle comes from the atomic bomb experiments. This shed minuscule atoms all over around the world. And you find it in any place in the world.
Yeah.
And that is the Anthropocene, this particle that has been created by human beings. Nobody thought that this could happen when these atomic bomb experiments happened. But now we have it, and we have to live with it. That is just an example. And AI has the potential of being of a similar category, I think.
I think it probably will be. But I also think, there'll probably be the generation that's living with technology right now, who's 7 years old, will have an incredible relationship to it that I personally cannot speak to understanding. I remember having to wait for my friends outside because we didn't have cell phones, and these kids are so connected. They're more, somebody told me this really interesting story that I thought was really beautiful actually. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And there were these kids who were gamers, and they realized that, oh, the foundation of gaming was actually unequal, because if the parent in England who gave the kid a pound, the parent in China gave the kid a yuan, the kid in America who got $1, the kid in South Africa who got their version of $1, all of them were playing on unequal playing ground that none of them had agreed to. So they created a cryptocurrency that put all of them on the same level. And I thought, wow. And so I'm extremely optimistic that kids will figure something out. It's not that they won't mess up, like every generation mess up, but they probably will invent solutions to problems that we've created, and they're going to create new problems for their kids.
And talking about video games, Alvaro, I actually now remember that the car discussion
Yeah.
would lead ultimately to a video game, because you basically said the future of cars is maybe a video game. It's interesting. I mean, more than 3 billion people play video games now, and all art forms kind of come together in video games. You want to do a video game somehow, no?
I was really interested in, the last time I played game, Grand Theft Auto, was so much about world building. And I think a lot of the kids are going to world build in a way that feels so disruptive to what we understand. Even their versions of gender. I remember when many of my trans friends was like, it took me it took me years actually to make sure that I got pronouns right. And when I teach, they don't even think about that. They know that all they, she, who, there's it's a native language for them. And so I'm just so curious about what world they will be building, because there's so much uh, disruption that they're going to deal with, that I think is much more radical. I think, for example, and this is sort of, if you're 16 years old now, you've lived through so much. You've lived through Black Lives Matter. You had Obama as a president. Sorry, this is very American centric, but but you had Trump, you had Me Too, you had all of these things. And so your idea of like radical upheavals and completely disrupting the thing that you knew a year ago is so ingrained in this generation, or in that generation, that I just think they're much more that they're much more disruptive than we could imagine. And I don't know what it'll mean. I don't have a judgment on it though.
Thank you so much, Alvaro. Now, Daniel will actually introduce the next sort of steps of the program. But before that, it would be great that you tell us a little bit about the music. There's going to be music, another collaboration of yours at the opening. Can you tell
So
us?
we're gonna go to the church, the chapel, and it's gonna be an encounter. And I'm very fortunate that one of my favorite musicians is going to perform in this encounter that we all hopefully will have. But I'm a painter, and I really like to think about how can painting also be an encounter. So, on what role can it play? So, I think we're going to go, hopefully, take a moment to go see it.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause for Alvaro Barrington.
No, thank you. Hopefully, I wasn't bored.